This is the 23rd Ask the Governor program, the monthly visit that the governor has with listeners across the state. And as Michelle stated, the number is 877-217-5757, toll free wherever you are. And we are 2 days now into a special legislative session with 2 weeks to go. And the governor made his address Monday as the session opened 5 o'clock Monday night. And Governor, how's it looking right now?
Well, I remain optimistic, but it is difficult. Compromise is hard. You know, you've got to be willing to take some things that you want in exchange for accepting some things that you don't, and that's not human nature. But I believe at the end of the day, we're going to get it done. We need to. We've got a lot of momentum in Louisiana right now in terms of unemployment, economic development, investment, job growth, and those sorts of things. We've been able to stabilize support for higher education. I think that's leading the way in terms of economic development here in Louisiana. But we've got some work to do because we've got to create a stable revenue structure that will allow us to move forward in a way that's more predictable and, quite frankly, more fair. And so we've got a lot of things under consideration. I'm optimistic we're going to get it done and very bullish about the future of our state.
Will there be some give and take on both sides if it gets done?
Yeah, well, there's going to have to be if it gets done. And look, that's the nature of things. You have to have a 2/3 vote in the House and in the Senate to get these things done. You can't get a 2/3 vote if you don't have support from both Republicans and Democrats. And so there will obviously have to be that give and take. That's the whole essence of a compromise. And look, I'm willing to accept some things that the Speaker put in his proposal, which I don't think are the best thing to do. But at the end of the day, I think we can put together a package that will address the cliff, that will create a new permanent structure and allow us to move forward. And that's in our best interest.
$1 billion in the scheme of a $25 billion annual budget. Some people don't think that's a whole lot. That's only 4%. But the 4%, as you have stated, in reality is much more than that when it comes to the state portion and the amount that's not protected.
Well, the $1 billion shortfall, and when I say shortfall, I want to get back to that in just a moment, but the $1 billion we're talking about is state general fund. And we have $9.4 billion in the state general fund altogether, but we only have discretion over $3.4 billion of that. $6 billion is out of our control. The Constitution directs those funds to specific places. Within the discretionary amount of $3.4 billion state general fund, there are really only two big pots of money, healthcare and higher education. And I mentioned this on Monday night. When I travel the state and when people contact me, the two things they don't want us to cut over and over and over again are higher education and healthcare. And we shouldn't cut. And any cut that approaches $1 billion state general fund would be catastrophic. We're not talking about minor cuts here and there. We would not be able to fund our partner hospitals that we have, for example, around the state that are running our LSU hospital system. Folks on waivers would be threatened. We would have to cut higher education. We would have to cut TOPS. And we shouldn't cut any of these things. And we don't have to. And the $1 billion, this is what I wanted to say about it. The cliff isn't there because revenue isn't coming in as forecasted. It's not there because expenditures exceeded what we expected. Rather, we've got about $1.38 billion worth of temporary revenue on the books that falls off on June 30th. And of that $1.38 billion, what I want to seek to maintain is $994 million so that next fiscal year, we will have the same amount of general fund as we currently have this year. And I think if we do that, there will still be some cuts, but we will be able to responsibly and reasonably fund our critical priorities and create a new system that will grow over time with the economy in terms of our revenue and offer the fairness and the stability, the predictability that we need.
Again, your number for Governor John Bel Edwards is 877-217-5757. James in Longview, Texas. Good afternoon, James. You're on Ask the Governor.
Well, good afternoon, Jim, and good afternoon, Governor.
Hi, James. Good to hear from you again.
Yeah, it's good to hear from you, too. Anyhow, I was noticing in the news, Governor, that you have an idea to cap, and I'll try to use the quote properly, obscene coaching salaries that are, unquote, that are pretty high. And I agree with you totally. I'm just wondering what is your legal remedy, and I'm just wondering, should athletics be kind of kept separate from academics, just from a ledger standpoint of view?
James, thank you for the call. I wasn't advocating for a legal remedy because these coaches' salaries would need to be addressed across the country and certainly by conference, perhaps. But my idea is that the NCAA do some sort of a study and see what would be reasonable and set a maximum amount that any school can pay coaches in a given year. The salary, and look, I'm not faulting any coach out there, and I'm not asking any university to unilaterally disarm. But sort of like some of the professional sports leagues do, where they set salary caps, something like that is needed because this is an escalation that is unprecedented. We have coordinators now, not even head coaches, that are being paid more than $2 million a year. And of course, I think the Southeastern Conference leads the way in this, and I think the SEC channel has given it a lot of revenue with which to pay these salaries. But it just seems that in an era where we are not doing what we should on college campuses overall, and specifically with respect to the pay that we give to professors and so forth, that we really need to find a way to make sure that we can curb this and not allow these salaries to continue to grow the way that they have.
I think you had made reference to some of the buyouts that schools are paying, in particular LSU. People are being paid not to work.
Yeah, and look, those are, I don't blame the coaches for negotiating that in their contracts if they can get it. But at the end of the day, it's hard to justify those things, and I get stopped all the time. And really, the reason people stop me is they don't understand that we're really not talking about state general fund dollars. We're not talking about taxpayer dollars. These dollars are raised by the athletic foundations and so forth. But it is still a situation that I think needs to be corrected, and I'm not trying to fault any individual or any institution. I just think it's something the NCAA needs to look at.
Ethan in St. Landry Parish. Good afternoon, Ethan. You're on the show with the governor.
How you doing, guys? How you doing, Governor?
Hi, Ethan. Doing fine, thank you.
I just wanted to pose a question. So I'm from Opelousas, and I'm noticing that in a lot of parts of the rural part of the state, the infrastructure has been, atrocious to say the least, with potholes, things like that. Is there any type of plan that your administration is going to have to combat any of that? Because lots of people I'm noticing, you can't even drive 20 miles an hour in some places.
Yeah, well, Ethan, thank you very much for the call. It just so happens that last week I was at the White House and at President Trump's invitation to meet with him along with a handful of other governors from around the country to discuss his transportation infrastructure initiative. Obviously, we've had a backlog in Louisiana that has been in the $13 to $14 billion range for a long time, and we are not doing enough. And we have bridges out there all over the state of Louisiana that were built by Franklin Roosevelt during the Depression. We've got roads where we are not doing enough to maintain them and preserve them. And we also have capacity issues in certain parts of the state where you have more traffic volume and high-density population areas, such as here in Baton Rouge and so forth. It is a tremendous challenge. Last year, you may remember, in the fiscal session, there was an effort to address this by seeking to increase the gas tax. And the fuel tax that we have is 30 years old. It's 16 cents. And just inflation has whittled the purchasing power of that 16 cents down to 7.5 cents. And it makes it very hard to deliver the transportation system that we want and need for quality of life and for economic development, job creation, investment, all those purposes. If you're trying to do today with 7.5 cents what you did 30 years ago with 16 cents. And so it is a real challenge, but we have some opportunities ahead of us. I think the president's talking about $50 billion in block grants to rural states like Louisiana over 10 years that we can plug into some of these needs if Congress sees fit to move forward with that proposal. Getting permitting down for transportation infrastructure, but also other projects such as coastal restoration from 8 to 10 years on average to 2 years will help. But at the end of the day, we are going to have to find a way to pay for the infrastructure system that we want. Otherwise, we're not going to get it. And we're going to continue to work with folks around the state and certainly the legislature to explore every avenue going forward.
How was the trip to the White House?
It was good. It was an interesting time to be up there with the other governors and to talk about it. From the perspective of governors who access federal transportation trust fund dollars, and many of the governors up there were rural governors, such as myself, Phil Bryant from Mississippi, and the challenges he has and that we have in Louisiana are basically the same. And so we were able to visit with the president and his administration, and the challenge we're going to have, quite frankly, Jim, is the biggest part of the initiative, because they're trying to take $200 billion over 10 years in federal investment and leverage a total of $1.5 to $1.7 trillion. Well, the non-federal match is going to be about 80 cents on the dollar. That's the inverse of what we get today from the Federal Transportation Trust Fund, where the federal dollars are 80 cents and we have to put up 20 cents. It's going to be very difficult for rural states like Louisiana to do that, because we can't, in many cases, get the private sector to invest their dollars because they can't return a profit on that investment. Here, we don't have the traffic volume and so forth. So it's a real challenge, but hopefully the Congress will work with the president and they'll put forward a package that will be good for the country and good for Louisiana, something we can take advantage of.
Did you like the White House?
Oh, yeah. And I've been there before, but it's always neat to be at the White House and to visit with the president and his administration and the other governors. And, Gary Cohn is the guy that's leading this infrastructure initiative. He and I had actually had a good conversation on the phone about 3 weeks ago, before I ever went up there. And I enjoy working with the administration, just as I enjoyed working with the prior administration. My position on that is, when you're going to be the best governor you can be for your state, you need to get along with whoever is there and work with them as best you can. And so I've had a good working relationship with President Trump and his folks.
Well, would you like to live there someday?
No, I am very happy right here in Louisiana.
Gary and a Meat, hometown of the governor. Gary, good afternoon. You're on Ask the Governor.
Good evening.
Hi, Gary.
You're on
Hi there.
You're on the air, sir.
Hello,
Yes, you're on the air.
Mr. Governor,
Yes, sir.
Coach Hendry.
Hey, I thought it might be you, Coach. This is my high school football coach here.
I hope everything's doing good with you and Donna.
Thank you, sir.
And I just got one little thing that we're very concerned about. We have a bridge out up on the golf course road. It's been out for 16 or 18 months, whatever it is, and it's basically closed down the Baptist church up there.
You talking about Mount Nebo?
Mount Nebo, yes.
Yeah.
And we got a lot of people from Mount Nebo. Linda and I were thinking about attending there when we moved back home last February, but of course the road was out.
Yes, sir.
So anyway, now they are talking about shutting down the Tangipahoa River Bridge east of town, and it definitely needs some repair, so that's going to really handicap us even more.
Yes, sir.
So we are asking, and I'm not the only one around here, you as a governor, if you can do anything to help us speed up.
Yes, sir. And thank you, Coach. And by the way, a decision was made after the flood in 2016 to replace rather than repair that bridge on 1054 near Mount Nebo, because the cost was about the same, but we would get a brand new bridge, and so that's what's been going on. I will check. It's my understanding that it's supposed to be open again very, very soon. I will check and get back with you. What I'm going to ask you to do, because I don't think I have your number right now, is stay on the line if you're still there and give Tucker your number, and we'll get back with you. And at the very minimum, if they're going to have to close down the Highway 16 bridge across the Tangipahoa River in order to make some repairs, we'll try to make sure that doesn't happen until after 1054 is open, and that it happens for as brief a period of time as possible. But thank you for your call.
All right. Thank you, Coach. Johnny in Baton Rouge. Johnny, you're on the air with Governor Edwards.
Hi there. Hello, Governor.
Hi, Johnny. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. I'm out here in Baton Rouge. I've been out here for about 5 years now, but I'm originally from North Louisiana. I do love the metropolitan area, but a lot of my friends and I are all in school, and for a lot of people, TOPS is a really big issue right now. How much longer do you think TOPS will be funded, and what are your ideas and suggestions and your plans for how we're going to fund public higher education?
Well, Johnny, thank you very much for the call. My idea with respect to TOPS is to fund it. Now, it is an expensive program because it pays for tuition for qualifying students. And over the 8 years before I became governor, tuition increased in Louisiana more than any other state in the nation. And as a result of that, the cost of the TOPS program also increased. But it's a commitment we made to students who are currently in college or in high school that if they took a certain curriculum, made a certain grade point average, and got a qualifying ACT score, that we would put them on TOPS and pay tuition. So I think we need to do it. We can do it if we fix the cliff, as I've mentioned. It's maintaining $994 million of the almost $1.4 billion that falls off the books. If we can do that, we will fully fund TOPS, and we will make sure that we don't cut higher education in terms of what we give in general fund support to our institutions. And by the way, this year is the first time in 9 years, almost a decade, where we're funding higher education without a cut relative to the previous year and fully funded the TOPS program. And as a result, they are doing great work across the state of Louisiana. We have record numbers of requests for admission in the fall. For example, the LCTCS system, the Community Technical College system, expects to grow by 5,000 students next year. The UL system has tremendous growth. LSU, over almost 70% increase in out-of-state requests for admission. And so if we want to be the state where we can attract economic investment and create jobs, we've got to make sure that we can provide skilled, educated workforce for those companies. And so it's the key to our long-term success. I'm committed to continuing to stabilize higher education and fully funding TOPS. And if the legislature will work with us and we can resolve this cliff, then we're going to make sure that that happens. And then we will be on a stable path forward. And I don't think you're going to hear this come up frequently going forward. At least it shouldn't happen.
Anthony in Baton Rouge. Hi, Anthony. You're on the air with Governor John Bel Edwards.
Hi, Governor. Thanks for taking
Hi,
my
Anthony.
call. My question is a duplicate of benefits for the Louisiana Restore program.
Yes, sir.
I understand that there's a bill before Congress to consider the SBA loans as part of your benefits for the people who are affected by the flood in 2016. Do you know, is there any status on that, or has it gained any traction?
Yeah. Well, Anthony, thank you for the call. And the language that was in the bill that passed is a partial fix. And we are working with the folks at Housing and Urban Development in Washington to find out exactly how it's going to be implemented and how many people in Louisiana could benefit from it. The wording in the bill that passed was not as good for Louisiana as a previous version that had passed from the House. And what it basically does, it allows the president to issue a waiver of the duplication of benefits exclusion. And so it's not automatic. But it only allows him to issue a partial waiver, not a full waiver, and we're trying to figure out exactly how that's going to be implemented. But until we figure that out and the president takes affirmative action on it, we're not going to know exactly how it's going to impact Louisiana. And of course, a partial fix is better than no fix. I can tell you we've been in constant communication with Congressman Garrett Graves, and he is working very hard to try to get the language interpreted as broadly as possible to render assistance to as many as possible. For example, we think there are about 10,000 homeowners across Louisiana who've been adversely impacted by the duplication of benefits problem coming out of Washington. We would like to extend the relief to as many of those 10,000 people as possible.
877-217-5757 is your number. Cora Laza from Baton Rouge, you're on the air with Governor John Bel Edwards.
Hello, Governor Edwards.
Good afternoon.
I have a question regarding the solar credit. My husband and I purchased a solar roof solar system, and it was during the time when the state actually was giving solar credits, but we have not received anything yet, nor we have any information of what's happening with the refund at the state.
Well, I need you to stay on the line, give your information to Tucker. We're going to have to call you back. I can tell you that a couple of years ago, the solar tax credit program was ended. We didn't have enough money to pay all the credits that had been certified. We came back last year, appropriated the money necessary to pay those credits. And as far as I know, that program is now fully complete. But, you know, in order to get you the most accurate and up-to-date information, please give your contact information to Tucker, and I will have someone from the Department of Revenue give you a call.
We go to New Orleans with Mike. Good afternoon, Mike. You're on the air with Governor Edwards.
Good afternoon, y'all. And Governor, I want to thank you for doing this show. I think the access it provides is great.
Thank you, Mike.
My question is regarding gun control and whether there are any proposals being kicked around either by your administration or the the Democratic leadership of Louisiana to propose new gun control regulations, either on a state level or if your office is doing anything on the national level.
Well, Mike, thank you for the call. Obviously, very timely. I see where you've got students walking out of school in Florida today and approaching their legislators in Tallahassee. And, you know, I expect that there may be some individual legislators who will file some bills for the regular session that starts next month in Baton Rouge. Right now, we're in a special session to deal with the cliff. But the things that I have consistently said is that I really believe we ought to look at the background check system. And in fact, common sense measures like this enjoy the support of, I think, upwards of 80% of the people in the country. And that's and also a clear majority of gun owners. But making sure, for example, that if someone has committed a crime, a violent crime, that gets reported to the database, so that they would fail a background check, and that needs to include the armed forces. You know, we found out from the shooting recently in Texas that individual had actually been jailed for battering his wife and should not have been able to pass a background check. We need to make sure that more people who are mentally unstable have that information reported to the background check folks so that they can't purchase a gun. I happen to believe that if you're on the no-fly list because you're are suspected of being a terrorist or might be a terrorist, it's probably a good idea not to allow you to buy a gun until you can get your name off that list. And you know, maybe they need to appropriate some additional money to provide an expedited way for you to do that. But I think that would be important. And you know, most of these measures on background checks, I believe, are actually consistent with what President Trump's talking about now too. And I've also said that I think devices like the bump stock ought not be legal because we don't allow fully automatic weapons to be sold to people, and I don't know why we'd allow an aftermarket attachment that would make the weapon the functional equivalent of an automatic weapon. And I see where President Trump came out today in urging a ban on devices like bump stock. So I think we can start from places that enjoy a broad amount of support across the country, seem to be common sense, and see if we can get those things done. And those, I think they would go a long way to rein in some of this senseless violence that we're seeing across the country. What we saw in Florida last week was truly evil. I know the governor there, Rick Scott, called it pure evil. I think he was right. That was diabolical, and certainly no kid should have to fear for their safety while they're at school, and no parent should have to worry whether their kid is safe at school.
Should there be an age limit on acquisition of assault weapons?
You know, I haven't considered that before. This young man was 18, and he had bought, as I understand it, upwards of 10 rifles, including the AR-15 that he used. I don't know that any of those were improperly bought in terms of what the existing law is. I think he passed a background check. You know, we have two ages for adulthood. One is 18, one's 21. It depends on what you're trying to engage in. I don't know that I have a firm opinion on that, but I would think it's a reasonable question to ask, and it's something that we should consider.
You're a hunter.
Yes, I am.
What kind of a weapon do you generally use when you go hunting? I would imagine not an assault weapon.
No, I do not. I don't own an assault weapon, but I do own pistols and shotguns and rifles. And typically for big game, I use a 300 Weatherby Magnum, it's a really good weapon. In fact, I shot an elk this year from 660 yards. Since you gave me the opening, I think I'll just throw that out there to you. It was a great hunting trip that I had up in northwest Colorado, and put a pretty good shot on an elk.
When you were in the Army, what kind of weapons did you use?
Well, as a lieutenant, I had just the M16, and then once I made captain, then I had the sidearm, which was a 9mm Beretta.
But that was it.
Yes, that's it.
That was sufficient.
Yes, sir.
877-217-5757. Albert in Baton Rouge. Hi, Albert. You're on the air with the governor.
Good afternoon, Governor.
Hi,
Governor
Albert.
Edwards, and it's also good to be with you once again, Jim Inkster. I'm calling. I'm a professor
I
at
recognize this
Southern
is
University.
Dr.
I'm
Samuels.
at Southern University,
Yeah.
and of course, my concern is with higher education and stable funding for higher education. We hear a whole lot about the cuts we've had in recent years. I think sometimes people aren't as aware as to all of the impacts. In addition to raising tuition, it really impacts and makes it harder for us who work here to do our jobs. When we lose, we've lost faculty, or when we lose people, we can't replace them. We have backlogs in terms of improving our facilities, and we've really lost ground in terms of faculty salaries. I think we're like at my university. I think we're like 52% of the Southern average. So it really makes it hard for us to recruit people.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Samuels.
Dr. Samuel, thank you very much for calling in. And look, I said it in response to an earlier question, and I think it had to do with Johnny from here in Baton Rouge, she called in and asked about this. I am trying to stabilize support for higher education. We were able to do it in the current year, and I think you can see the benefits that it's brought to the university. It's very important to do that. The funding formula for higher education was basically inverted. 10 years ago, it was 2/3 state support, 1/3 tuition. Today, it's about the opposite: 1/3 state support, 2/3 tuition. We can't stay on that road, which means we've got to stabilize state support. And with so much of the revenue that the university and the systems have to administer education coming from tuition, we have to make it so that these students can enroll, which is one of the things I'm excited about. Is we have requests for admissions across the state of Louisiana that are way up for this fall, which is exactly what we need. So we're fighting very hard to continue to stabilize higher education, and then as we move forward with a new tax structure that will grow with the economy, and given the way the economy is growing now and it's poised to continue to grow going into the future, I think we will do even better, and we will be able to reinvest responsibly and strategically as we move forward. I think that's critically important for us.
Alyssa in Baton Rouge. Hi, Alyssa. You're on the air with the governor.
Yes, sir. I would like to know, first off, I think you're a fabulous governor. But second off, I want to know, are they going to try to do a constitutional convention where they try to work on the Constitution to make it not so target health care and education, which are the two most important things to our state, because it brings in revenue from outside our state?
Alyssa, thank you for the call. And there's been some interest in the Constitutional Convention for years. In fact, as a legislator, I voted for a Constitutional Convention on a number of occasions. Now, we have a cliff that I'm trying to solve. That cliff comes June 30th, and I want to focus all of our time, effort, attention, energy on doing that. If you had a Constitutional Convention, even if it was limited, let's say you just want to do Articles 6 and 7 of the Constitution that dealt with budget and taxes, you would have to go through a long process of trying to figure out how you're going to select your delegates, when it's going to meet. It would have to do its job, finish up with a package, and have the delegates vote in favor of it. Then you've got to put it in front of the people across the state, and they have to vote in favor of it. Then you create the new structures that are called for in the new Constitution and have them up and running. So you're necessarily talking about a process that would span the better part and perhaps more than 3 years. So I want to get there. I want to talk about those things, but I want to fix the cliff first. Because we cannot assume that a constitutional convention is going to be successful. And so we should do what we can do now to restore fairness, stability, and predictability to our tax system within the current structure that we have. And then we should try to address the structure by creating more flexibility as to how we actually spend money, and specifically how we would make cuts when we have shortfalls.
Richard in New Iberia, you're on the air with Governor Edwards.
Hello, Governor. Thank you for
Hi,
taking the
Richard.
call. I believe you just about answered my question, but I still have the question.
Okay.
Everybody is wringing their hands. They're trying to cut things to meet the budget. The very simple solution is kicking it down the road one more year. You're having special sessions that are costing $60,000, and yet all they have to do is extend these temporary taxes.
Is that palatable at all?
Well, it's not reform, the penny especially, but it's something I can do as part of a compromise.
Richard in New Iberia asked about possibly retaining the penny sales tax, and you said you're open to compromise. Does that mean the whole penny, part of the penny, or what are we talking about?
Yeah, well, first of all, this is one of those things I don't like. The penny sales tax is regressive by its nature. It's not something the task force recommended that we keep. In fact, the recommendation was that we let it fall off the books and that we move forward with reform items. However, I cannot accept that we would keep the full fifth penny. If we can keep a part of it and solve the cliff and do so in a permanent fashion and in a way that is at least half reform, and we don't create new dedications, because one of the things that we were just talking about with Alyssa is we're so restricted in our flexibility to administer the budget and to make cuts, and part of that is dedications. So long as we don't create any new dedications out of whatever sales tax we keep out of that fifth penny, then I think it can be part of a compromise going forward. Very difficult because all matters related to revenue are difficult just by their nature. But this is the art of what's possible, perhaps, and that's what we're trying to get done in the session. And a lot of folks don't want any part of that fifth penny, and other folks would just like to extend the entire fifth penny. And so we just have to find some happy, common ground there and get it done.
But not for 2 years.
No, look, that's one of the reasons we can't do that is we need stability and predictability over the long term. And if we did it that way, then 2 years from now, we would be presenting another executive budget based on an REC forecast that would have a decline of hundreds of millions of dollars. And then TOPS would be on the chopping block again, and so would our partner hospitals and higher education. And our credit rating agencies are watching us. We need to inspire confidence in them that we're getting our house in order so that they don't downgrade us. If they downgrade us, it actually costs us more money to service the debt that we have. So we don't need any more temporary piecemeal approaches. We need to get the problem solved on a permanent basis.
Ronnie in New Orleans. Hello, Ronnie. You're on the air with Governor John Bell Edwards.
Hi, good afternoon, Jim. Good afternoon, Governor
Hi,
Edwards.
Ronnie.
Thank you for taking my call. Governor, I'm very, very concerned amid a crippling opioid crisis in our state that our Department of Health, as a result of the shortfall, as a result of the cliff, may have to absorb upwards of billions of dollars when you include federal matching funds. What can you say to patients and providers across our state who rely on Medicaid to get treatment services?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the call, and I am with you. I'm concerned about that. One of the things that you should, I think, take comfort in is that I don't think anybody in the legislature wants to see those cuts happen. That's why we're in special session right now. We are trying very hard to fix the cliff at $994 million. That's what we need to maintain out of that $1.38 billion that's going to expire. And I think we can get that done. And when we do, we're not going to have those crippling cuts to the Department of Health. And one of the things that we've done, by the way, is we have expanded Medicaid in Louisiana, and we now have health insurance available to about 464,000 working poor people in Louisiana. And as a result of that, we've actually had about 19,000 individuals access substance use treatment. A lot of that directed at opioids, and the other things we've been able to do is limit opioid prescriptions when it comes to pain that they're having that's not associated with cancer or hospice. We're limiting greatly the number of pills that they can be given, and that's having some impact across the state that's very positive. In fact, even after Medicaid expansion, where there's healthcare coverage for these individuals that includes pharmaceutical coverage, we've actually seen a net decrease in the number of prescriptions, which is a good thing because we don't want people addicted to opioids to begin with. The other thing that I think that's helpful is while the president declared a public health emergency around opioids months ago, and I was at the White House when he did that as well, the Congress just finally put some money behind that. And so we believe we're going to see some help from the federal government that will help us bring awareness to this issue and promote treatment options. We have to educate people. We have to intervene and we have to treat. And so we're committed to doing those things as best we can.
What about the work requirements for Medicaid that some are suggesting is a good idea?
Yeah, well, I actually went before the press club, and I can't remember when it was, and discussed an initiative that we had to do work requirements, and it's really work, education, training, community engagement requirements. Subsequent to that, the CMS actually came out with guidelines as to what they would want to see in those types of proposals. And so we were working to move in this direction because I happen to believe that people who can and should work, they can and should work. But we know that some of those folks don't work because they're not employable without getting some education and some skill. And so making sure that we take people who are on Medicaid, who should work, and make the job referrals, the training referrals, the education referrals, I think is a good thing. And so we're moving in that direction, and we're actually working on a bill now. The administration is, LDH, in my office, with the chairman of the House and Senate Health and Welfare Committees, so that we can have a responsible plan going forward to promote work, not in a punitive way. The goal is not to kick people off Medicaid. And by the way, people can go to work, and if they still make less than 138% of the federal poverty level, they're going to stay on the Medicaid expansion. So people should not see this as an effort to kick people off of health care coverage. It is to promote work because we think that that's and education and training and community engagement because we think that's the right thing to do.
Melissa in Denham Springs. Melissa, you're on with Governor Edwards.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. And my question has to do with the special sessions and as far as it with victims and the continuance that are allowed by law and how it's clogging the system and how last year, for example, we had a special session in February, and I believe you have 15 days before and 15 days after to continue that in the court system. It's clogging the dockets. It's affecting victims negatively by getting it continued. All
right, I'm not.
Okay, Melissa, yeah, I'm not certain what you're talking about, but it may be this. For attorneys who are members of the legislature, if they're in session, then items that are appearing before the court, they can get a continuance on. Now, they have to ask for the continuance, but if they ask for it, they'll get it. And sometimes legislators choose to come to the Capitol, and sometimes they choose to go to court. I don't believe that this affects criminal matters, at least not from folks who are in the DA's office. And I guess if you've got a criminal defense attorney who's in the legislature, he or she can get a continuance. And if that's not what you're talking about, please stay on and give Tucker your information. We'll try to find out more and call you back. But I was having a hard time of understanding exactly what the issue was.
What you was talking about.
But I will tell you that nobody relishes calling a special session, not me, but we have a tremendous problem that we have to fix. I think we need to fix it in February, because otherwise we will go into session, a regular session next month, and I don't believe we can pass a budget, and I don't believe we would have a capital outlay bill, and we would end up causing an awful lot of problems between now and the end of June, and we shouldn't do that, and a special session was required to try to avoid that.
Alberto in Jackson Parish. Hello, Alberto. You're on with Governor Edwards.
Yes, I would like to ask a question about how far along we have came with equally prioritizing the ratings of our rural road systems.
All right, Alberto, prioritizing the rural road system. I'm not 100% sure what you're getting at there. I can tell you that the maintenance and preservation of our existing road infrastructure is a very high priority, and it gets a larger percentage of what is admittedly a smaller amount of money that we are investing in our road system. And that's because the efforts that we make, both through the Transportation Trust Fund but also through the capital outlay, I have directed that we prioritize the Highway Priority Program. And we're doing that with a smaller amount of money overall, but we're giving a bigger share of it to transportation infrastructure needs, and that includes maintenance and preservation efforts, which is typically the most important thing that happens in rural areas where you don't have capacity problems, so you don't need a road widened, for example, but you do need to overlay it on occasion. You got to go in there and fix it, and if you do that, you can extend the life cycle of the road by many years and ultimately save a lot of money. And so that's something that Sean Wilson works on constantly. Now, we're not doing as much in the way of preservation as we'd like to do either, but because we are very much resource constrained. But I can tell you it is a priority, and it receives priority funding in terms of the percentage of the money that we are spending on transportation infrastructure and allocating it to maintenance and preservation.
We're unable to take any more calls, but we will be back. The governor will on March 21st, exactly a month from today. And the session by then will be over. The special session, the regular session, will have started. You think you'll be talking about success in the special session a month from now?
Well, yeah, I'm optimistic. We will. We'll be talking about, I hope, a successful special session that sets up for a successful regular session. And I thank you again for the opportunity to be here with you for our 23rd show, Jim, and all the listeners for tuning in.
Thank you, Governor.